Dot for Short by Frieda Friedman. Illustrated by Carolyn Haywood. Copyright 1947. Chapter 4. Dot Recites. It was Friday, April 12th, the day that Dot had dreaded, the day she had been hoping would never come, the day she must recite in the auditorium. Walking home from school at 3 o'clock, Dot asked herself for the 100th time why this awful thing should be happening to her. She tried to push the thought of tonight out of her mind, but she could think of nothing else. If only something would happen so she need not face those hundreds of people. Dot didn't want anything serious to happen, of course, but, well, maybe the janitor might lose his key so that he couldn't open the school door tonight. Please, prayed Dot, let the janitor lose the key. That wouldn't hurt anyone, and it would help me so much. It was a foolish thing to wish, she knew, but she kept saying it to herself over and over again. When Dot reached home, she found Mommy in the kitchen pressing her blue dress. Dot had refused to accept anyone's money for a new dress, and she was going to wear one that Fluff had outgrown, a pretty blue dress with white cuffs and a white collar. Mommy had changed the collar and cuffs so that the dress would look different. Now Mommy finished ironing the tiny tucks and held up the dress for Dot to see. "It looks very pretty, doesn't it? As pretty as a new dress." Mommy's quiet voice seemed unnaturally cheerful, as if she wished she could iron out Dot's nervousness along with the wrinkles. Grandma joined them in the kitchen. Dot noticed that she was holding a little pin shaped like a butterfly. All the Flemings knew it was solid gold and one of Grandma's greatest treasures. Grandpa had given it to her on their first anniversary a long, long time ago, even before Daddy was born. "Would you like to wear this tonight?" she asked Dot. "I'd love it," Dot told her. This was the first time that Grandma had offered her pretty pin to any of the Fleming sisters. It showed how excited she was about tonight. Peg came into the little kitchen holding a turquoise blue velvet band. "Want to wear this in your hair tonight?" she asked. "It'll look nice with your blue dress." "I thought you were going to wear it," Dot replied, looking longingly at Peg's favorite band. "I'm not the one who's going to be on the stage. You are, so you wear it," said Peg, trying to make her voice sound light and casual. Dot felt important and afraid that she would disappoint her happy, proud family. Dot started the bath running. As she undressed, she heard the clock strike 4. At 4 o'clock tomorrow, what would she be remembering? That she had been calm and not a bit nervous, and that people had clapped loudly? Or would she be remembering that her voice had been low and trembling, that she had been a fail? No, she wouldn't think about that. In fact, she wouldn't think about the entertainment at all. There, the tub was almost full. Dot jumped in and shivered. The water was cold, as it often was at that hour in the afternoon. Dot took a quick, uncomfortable bath and hurried out again. "This isn't a very good beginning," she told herself as she shivered and sneezed. Back in her small bedroom, she put on her stockings and Oxfords. Then she looked down. Oh dear, she was wearing 2 different stockings. Things certainly were going wrong this afternoon. Her fingers trembled as she tried to untie the shoelace, but the knot wouldn't come loose. She had to insert one of Peg's hairpins in order to untie it. When Dot was dressed, she put the blue band through her black curly hair and fastened Grandma's pin on her dress. Then she looked at herself in the mirror over the dresser. The face that looked back at her was hot and flushed. The dark brown eyes were burning. "I wish it was over," Dot told the girl in the mirror. The girl in the mirror looked as if she did too. At 6 o'clock Daddy came home, and Dot realized that he had not banged the door as hard as he usually did. Mommy must have realized it too, for she looked at him questioningly and said, "Aren't you feeling well? Why are you home so early?" Daddy said that he felt fine, but he wanted to shave and change his suit. It wasn't every day that a daughter of his recited in the assembly, he said, grinning at Dot. Mommy looked worried, as if she did not quite believe him, and Dot thought that in spite of Daddy's gay air, that he looked tired and thin. Suddenly she was afraid. Nothing must ever happen to Daddy or Mommy or Grandma or Mike or the girls, ever. "What silly things I'm thinking," she told herself. "It's because I'm so worried about tonight." When all the Flemings were ready to leave for the school building, Daddy looked from Grandma to Mommy and then to the three girls. He turned to Mike and winked. Say, I bet everyone will wonder how we two men got such five beautiful women. Maybe they won't want to walk with us. They'll be glad to walk with me, said Mike confidently. I'm wearing my newest shirt. Dot had to be in the auditorium by 8, but the guests weren't admitted until 20 minutes after 8, so Dot left her family in front of the school. If you get scared, look at me and I'll make a face, Mike told her, puffing out his cheeks, wrinkling his nose, and squinting to show what he meant. Dot giggled nervously, said goodbye, and walked into the school building. She had never been in the school at night before, and it seemed strange and unfamiliar. The halls were dimly lighted, and Dot's footsteps made a loud, hollow sound as she walked toward the auditorium. The big room looked empty and lonesome, for there were only a handful of people in it. All the lights were on, and Dot blinked as she came in from the dark corridor. "Hello, Dorothea!" Miss Hall's warm, pleasant voice greeted her. It was so familiar that it changed the strange room back into the cheerful auditorium that Dot had known since she was in kindergarten. Miss Hall explained that the performers were to sit in the first few rows and that everyone was to act perfectly natural on the stage, to take a step in any direction, to use gestures, if that would help, to emphasize what the speaker was saying, and even to smile at friends in the audience. Miss Hall went on to explain that there was no need to be nervous because right behind the curtain there was a teacher who had a copy of all the speeches. If anyone forgot the next words, the teacher would prompt him or her. That news made Dot feel better, for she had dreamed night after night that in the middle of her speech she couldn't think of the next few words. In a few moments the people began to fill the auditorium. It buzzed with conversation. Children called to one another, and teachers said, "Quiet, please." Dot heard the squeaks of seats being lowered and the rustle of coats being removed. She heard an excited voice shout, "There she is!" Turning around, she saw Mike and the other Flemings. With them was Pierre Boulanger, who made a little bow to her while the others waved. Dot's heart felt happy at the thought of Pierre, who had spent 10 cents to hear her recite. The buzz grew louder. The room was alive with excitement, and it was getting very hot. Someone opened the upper parts of the windows with a long pole. The plump music teacher walked up the 3 steps that led to the stage, sat down at the piano, and loudly played the opening bars of the Star-Spangled Banner. Instantly the buzz turned into a deep hush. Everyone stood up and sang. Dot thought that she recognized Mike's voice above all the others, but she was not sure until it cracked on "The Rocket's Red Glare." That and the loudness convinced her. Miss Hall had said that the first-year students would entertain first, the second year next, and so forth. Dot, remembering that she represented the 5th grade, had thought that she would have plenty of time to get very calm or very upset. When the first-year children were called, the audience chuckled happily. In their stiffly starched dresses and skirts, the little ones looked very cute and solemn. They mounted the steps slowly. Their teacher gave them a note on the pitch pipe, and they all sang "Do." Then they followed their leader in "My Country 'Tis of Thee." The audience clapped loudly, and the children rushed down the steps. The first year was a big success. Dot's mind wandered while the second, third, and fourth-year students performed. All of a sudden she heard the principal's voice, and it seemed to come from a great distance, the way Mommy's did when it awakened her from a sound sleep in the morning. The principal's voice was saying, "And now the 5th grade will be represented by Dorothea Ann Fleming, who will recite an original composition entitled 'What America Means to Me.'" Like someone in a dream, Dot made her way past the others in the row, walked down the aisle, and up the 3 steps to the stage. When she faced the audience, the hundreds of faces were one big blur. Not even Daddy's red head stood out from the rest. Dot's voice did not seem to belong to her at all. It was low and nervous at first, but it became stronger as it went on. Dot found herself drying her perspiring hands on the handkerchief she was clutching. She was neither calm nor upset. The only feeling she had was that she was part of a dream. Then, in the middle of a sentence, she felt a tickling sensation in her nose. Oh dear, she was going to sneeze, right here in front of all these people. She mustn't, not until she had finished her speech. Dot turned her head away from the audience and wrinkled her nose to hold back the sneeze. There, that did it. She continued her sentence. She was so pleased that the tickle had vanished that now her voice was louder and firmer than it had been. It was only for a minute or two, though. To her horror, she could feel the tickling sensation again, and this time it was stronger than before. Dot took a quick breath, thinking that might help. She must go on with her speech, even though it was hard to think of the next word and to control a sneeze at the same time. The effort made her hands perspire more than ever, and her voice quiver. Then it happened. In spite of all her efforts, Dot found herself standing in the middle of the platform, closing her eyes and sneezing once, twice, 3 times. She couldn't seem to stop. From far away she heard a low chuckle that grew louder as it spread through the big room. It reminded Dot that she was not part of a dream, but that she, Dorothea Ann Fleming, was reciting before hundreds of people, and that she was amusing them by sneezing right in the middle of a sentence. Tears came to her eyes, tears of anger and embarrassment. She dried her hands on her handkerchief and wondered what to do next. Go on reciting, of course. She must go on. The laughter in the audience had faded, and now people were moving restlessly in their seats, waiting for Dot to do something. Dot opened her mouth to speak, but the thing she had dreamed so often had come true. She could not think of the next word. She could not think at all. She was so busy trying to remember that she did not notice the voice behind the curtain. The people down below were coughing nervously. All that Dot could think of was how worried Mommy must be. The voice from behind the curtain grew louder, and now Dot realized that it was talking to her. Why, this was the teacher who had a copy of all the speeches. Dot wanted to laugh and cry as she listened to the teacher's quiet, clear words. Now there was no question of what Dot must do. She must recite the speech so well that the audience would remember her words long after they had forgotten what a failure she had almost been. She straightened her shoulders, stood her very tallest, and turned to face the audience. Her eyes looked straight into Mommy's, and Mommy nodded lovingly. Mike, sitting next to her, puffed out his cheeks and made a face. Dot smiled at him. In a loud, clear voice, she continued her speech, and she knew that she was reciting far better now than she had before the interruption. The room was still, and faces were raised attentively. Dot's voice, usually so low and timid, rang through the room when she gave her last sentence. "And that is what America means to me." A wave of applause spread through the big room. It seemed to rush toward the stage and surround Dot. It followed her down the 3 steps and straight to her seat. Her eyes were blurred from excitement, her cheeks were burning, and she felt very, very tired, as if she had taken a long walk. But she had the pleasant feeling that comes with doing something well. She heard someone whisper, "That kid had courage." The evening Dot had dreaded was almost over. In those few hours, in fact, in the few minutes that she had been on the stage, Dot had known so many different feelings: fear and humiliation, then courage, determination, and success. Having so many emotions, one right after the other, made you feel exhausted, Dot decided. Her thoughts were interrupted by loud music and the scuffle of feet. She realized that the music teacher was playing the final march and that everyone was standing up, putting on hats and coats, talking to one another. Again the room buzzed with conversation, but over the buzz came Mike's voice, loud and filled with pride. "The girl who sneezed," he was explaining to someone, "was my sister." Chapter 5: A Present for Mother's Day. It wasn't any special noise that made Dot look up from her geography book. It was the unusual quiet in the living room. All the Flemings were busy. Daddy sat in his big leather chair, one long leg thrown across its arm. He was reading the second half of the newspaper. Grandma was reading the first half, the part that had the advertisements. Mommy was fixing a patch in Mike's trousers. Mike himself was grinning over a book of comics, and Peg, Fluff, and Dot sat around the table doing their homework. As Dot looked up, she saw Grandma's eyes open wide at something she was reading. Then, turning to Daddy, Grandma asked very seriously, "Jim, would you like to give me a $2,500 bracelet for Mother's Day? This ad says it's the perfect gift." "There's nothing I'd like better," said Daddy, his voice just as serious as Grandma's. Why, I'll buy you one for each arm. I didn't know you wanted any. Everyone looked up in bewilderment during this conversation. Then they realized that Grandma and Daddy were joking, as they often did. They realized something else, too. Mother's Day was less than 2 weeks from now. Peg's eyes sent a message to Fluff, to Dot, and to Mike. They all understood. Mommy looked up from her sewing to smile at Daddy. She noticed the message that was traveling around the room, and she understood, too. Listen, children, she said. You are not to buy me anything for Mother's Day. I have everything I want. Do you hear me? Yes, we hear you, said Mike, but we're not promising not to get you anything. Peg remembered that she had left a book in her bedroom. She rose and went out. A minute later she called Fluff and asked her to help find the book. Fluff pretended that she was annoyed as she, too, got up and went out. It was not long before Dot was called. Even though he hadn't been asked yet, Mike went along. When they were all in the bedroom, Peg shut the door. We've got to decide what to get for Mommy, she said. We haven't much time, and I bet we haven't much money. I know I haven't since I got my permanent. I've got 30 cents, Mike announced. I could earn more delivering for Minton's if I could play hooky for a day or two. Oh, no, his sisters all exclaimed together. They knew how sad Mommy would feel if she thought her present had been bought with money that Mike had earned playing hooky. I have $1, said Fluff. Peg guessed that she had about 75 cents, and Dot thought she had 50. I'll figure out how much all that is, said Mike, getting a pencil and paper. He moistened the pencil point and wrote 4 figures, one under the other, in a crooked column, as Peg recited them again. Then, frowning until his eyes were almost closed, he added, $3.55, he announced proudly. That's better than I thought, said Fluff. We can get a nice present for that. Dot was not good in arithmetic, but she did not see how $1, 75 cents, 50 cents, and 30 cents could possibly add up to so much money. She closed her eyes and pictured the school blackboard with the numbers written on it in white chalk. I'm afraid it's only $2.55, she said. Mike must have made a mistake. I did not, Mike declared. I'll add from the bottom up just to prove it. He sucked his pencil point again and added from the bottom up. You're right, he admitted to Dot. I carried 2 instead of 1. It makes a difference. Peg suggested that each one of them write a list of presents, and tomorrow evening they'd meet here in the bedroom at the same time and decide what to get. One by one they went back into the living room, trying to look natural. Daddy looked up, grinned, and asked if they had found the book. While she undressed that night, Dot wondered what she would like to receive if she were Mommy. Mommy did need stockings, gloves, and things like that, even if she said that she didn't. But Dot wished she could think of something special. What was extra nice and still cost so little that there would be some money left over to buy Grandma a present, too? They had all agreed that Grandma must get something. Dot thought and thought until she fell asleep. During the night she dreamed that she was late for school. This was a dream she often had. Sometimes she dreamed she was late because she couldn't find a book or her coat. Now Dot dreamed she was late because she stopped in front of the photographers to admire pictures of babies and girls in communion dresses. She lingered there so long that she had to rush along Third Avenue to her school, rush up the 3 flights of stairs, and dash into her classroom, panting and perspiring. Dot woke up breathing hard, her heart pounding loud and fast as if she really had been running. She sat up in bed until she became more calm. How silly to dream about Foreman's, the little photography shop that she passed so many times a day. Then Dot realized that her dream was the answer to the question on her mind. There was nothing that Mommy would like better than a picture of her 4 children. She would not scold them for spending their money on that. The idea pleased Dot so much that she was tempted to awaken Peg and tell it to her. But she decided not to, for she knew that ideas which seem perfectly wonderful at night sometimes seem very foolish in the daytime. The next evening Peg excused herself and went out of the room. One by one the others followed. Grandma and Mommy didn't seem to notice, but Daddy scratched his head and said, "What, another book?" In the little bedroom they all compared lists. Most of the items were the same: gloves, handkerchiefs, stockings, a slip. Mike's list was headed by a dog. Dot's list ended with a picture of the 4 of us. "Say, that's not a bad idea," Peg said. "Mommy wouldn't mind if we spent our money on that." It was exactly what Dot had been thinking. Mike jumped up in excitement. "We could give Grandma the frame," he said. "Dot, you could write a poem for Grandma to go with the frame and one for Mommy to go with the picture. We'd give them the presents the same minute so they could open them together." Mike was breathless from his long speech and his enthusiasm over his own idea. Dot, Peg, and Fluff looked at him with more admiration than usual. It really wasn't a bad idea. Peg said that she would stop at Foreman's and see if they could get the picture and frame for $2.55. If they could, she'd try to make the appointment for Saturday morning. The next day Peg reported that for $2.50 they could have their picture taken and framed. She had made the appointment for Saturday. Peg said it was too bad that they didn't have more money, for then they could have had a colored picture. Dot was glad they didn't have the extra money. She was sure her picture would look plain compared with her pretty sister's. Color would only emphasize how pale and dark she was and how light and pink-cheeked they were. On Saturday, Mommy and Grandma could hardly believe their eyes. One by one, Peg, Fluff, Dot, and Mike said they were going for a walk. Mike wore his Sunday suit. His red hair was brushed back in neat waves, and even his nails were clean. Each of the girls wore their prettiest dress and carried a little purse. Their hair, too, looked brushed and shiny. Mommy looked as if she were about to ask a question. Then she must have changed her mind, for all she said was, "Goodbye, children. Have a very good time." On Saturdays the Third Avenue was even noisier and more crowded than on weekdays. On the block where the Flemings lived there was a radio shop. Its door was open, and the loudest music Dot had ever heard came rushing out into the street. The pushcart men were yelling, "Bananas, apples, oranges, get 'em here, get 'em here." Two boys were shouting at each other from different sides of the street. Another boy rode a homemade scooter whose wheels needed oiling, for they squeaked noisily as the boy rushed back and forth. A girl with pigtails and fat cheeks blew a whistle that made a thin, shrill sound. Other girls and boys bounced balls against buildings or played come out, wherever you are." Every now and then all these sounds, loud as they were, would be drowned out completely by the roar of the L train overhead. The Flemings could not all walk together, for there were too many women wheeling baby carriages and too many children darting in and out. Dot and Mike walked behind the other two. Dot noticed two older boys coming toward them. She guessed what they would do when they saw Fluff and Peg, and they did just what she expected. They looked at both girls very approvingly and whistled. Dot saw her two sisters toss their heads and try to act as if they hadn't heard the whistles. She knew they didn't like to be whistled at, but she wondered how it felt to be so pretty that people noticed you when you passed. A boy, riding a bicycle very unsteadily, almost knocked Mike over. Mike wasn't angry. He looked at the bicycle with admiration and said that when he was rich, he too was going to have a bicycle. "I'm going to have an ermine coat," Peg said. "I'm going to have an emerald ring," Fluff announced. Dot said nothing. The thing she wanted most was something she couldn't buy, not even if she were the richest girl in the whole world. It was to be tall and beautiful. She heard footsteps behind her, and a voice with a foreign accent said, "I am so glad we meet." They all stopped and said hello to Pierre Boulanger. He looked at them with admiration, especially at Dot. Mike explained that they were going to the photographer's to have their pictures taken for Mother's Day. He told Pierre about the frame for Grandma and the picture for Mommy. Pierre thought it was a wonderful idea. His eyes brightened as if he had an extra pleasant thought. "I will give them something for Mother's Day too," he said. Pierre did not walk in front with Peg and Fluff. He stayed behind with Dot, letting Mike get a few steps ahead. "I want to tell you," he said hesitantly, as if he were afraid to hurt Dot's feelings. "I think you look very nice. You are so petite." He blushed as he said it. Dot did not know what petite meant, but she could tell from Pierre's voice that it was something nice. Petite. She must remember the word and find out what it meant. She hoped it did not mean little. In front of the photographers, Pierre said goodbye and left them. Mr. Foreman led them through the front room, which was lined with photographs, into a little rear room that contained a few dusty chairs and his camera. The camera had a black cloth thrown over it. The photographer put a big chair in the middle of the room and blew the dust off of it and told the three girls to sit down. Peg and Fluff each sat on an arm of the chair, and Dot was in the middle. Then he told Mike to stand behind Fluff and put a hand on her shoulder. Now Mr. Foreman stepped behind his camera and covered his head with the black cloth. "Relax," he said. "Smile. Act natural. You're all too stiff, much too stiff." Dot did not feel natural, and it was hard to act it. Her lips felt stiff from forcing a smile. Mr. Foreman came out from behind the black cover. He sounded like an impatient schoolteacher. "Listen, kids," he said. "You all look as stiff as dummies in a store window. Forget you're having your picture taken. Each one of you try to think of something very, very pleasant." The first thing Dot thought of was the way Pierre had sounded when he had said with his French accent, "I think you look very nice. You are so petite." There was a loud click, and Dot jumped. She had completely forgotten for a minute that she was having a picture taken. Mr. Foreman's voice was more pleasant when he told them that it would be a nice picture and they should call for it next Saturday. What a long week between Saturdays! On Thursday Mike dropped into the photographer's to see if the picture might be ready. It wasn't. On Friday he tried again. Still the picture wasn't ready. On Saturday Dot went with him, but Mr. Foreman explained that because of damp weather the picture wasn't dry. Dot and Mike looked at each other in despair. Mr. Foreman promised that he himself would deliver the picture that very evening. They were not to worry. "Why don't we take the frame home?" Mike suggested. "Then you could put the poem with it, and we'd have that much ready." It seemed like a good idea, so Mr. Foreman wrapped the glass in the frame, and Mike proudly carried the package home. Dot stopped to talk to Mommy and Grandma in the kitchen, while Mike sneaked the present into the closet that Peg and Dot shared. There it was covered with dresses and coats. Saturday evening was the longest evening that Dot remembered. Each time a trolley bell clanged on the street, one of the four Flemings jumped up and said, "Was that our bell?" Mommy and Grandma said, "No," at least 20 times that evening. Finally the bell did ring, a loud, important-sounding buzz. Mike rushed to press the button that opened the downstairs door. In the living room the three girls waited breathlessly. They heard Mike open the upstairs door and say in a flat, disappointed voice, "Oh, it's only you." Then Mike yelled into the dining room, "It's only Daddy." Daddy looked at the three disappointed faces of his daughters. "This is a warm welcome, I must say. I left my key in my other coat, and I won't be home till late tonight. I don't want to ring the bell, so I came back for the key." Bedtime came, but not the picture. The next morning at breakfast, Daddy gave a pair of stockings to Mommy and another pair to Grandma. "Happy Mother's Day," he said to them. Where, oh where, Dot wondered, could their Mother's Day present be? How awful if Mother's Day came and went and they didn't have the picture. As she dug her spoon angrily into her half-orange, the bell rang. "Hooray!" shouted Fluff, and Peg sighed a deep sigh and said, "At last!" Mike, his mouth full of toast, ran to the door. Dot jumped up and hurried to her room for the frame with the verse tucked under the wrapping. She felt sure that Mike would be right behind her with the picture for Mommy. She walked up to Grandma, kissed her plump cheek, and said, "Happy Mother's Day from all of us." Grandma took the package, and as she said, "Oh, you darling children," she began to untie the string. Where was Mike? Dot wondered. He came in carrying not a big package with a picture in it, but 2 tiny boxes. He looked annoyed. "From Pierre," he said, giving one box to Mommy and one to Grandma. "For Mother's Day. He's too bashful to come in." Mommy, who had looked a little bewildered when Grandma had been given a present and she hadn't, opened Pierre's box eagerly. Inside was a ring that Pierre had carved from a peach pit. She read aloud the note that came with it. "To Mrs. Fleming, because, as you say in America, you are such a peach." Grandma's box had the same thing. As soon as Grandma saw what Pierre's box contained, she went back to unwrapping her first present. She drew out a square piece of glass in a frame with a piece of cardboard in it. She looked from one to the other, and there was a look of amazement on her face. It changed to a smile as she said, "Oh, a picture frame. How nice. Thank you very much." Dot saw Grandma's eyes light on the note. Grandma must have thought it would explain, for she took it up eagerly and read aloud. "Here's a gift, Grandma dear, that we hope you will like. It brings love from Peg, from Fluff, Dot, and Mike." "I do like it very, very much," said Grandma, but she still looked puzzled, as if she was wondering what picture she could put into the frame. "Grandma," Peg started to explain, "you weren't supposed to open that package till Mommy got hers. You see—" Again the doorbell rang. Mike knocked over his chair as he rushed to the door. In the kitchen there was complete silence. Everyone waited. Dot heard footsteps coming up the stairs. She heard Mr. Foreman's voice saying, "Well, better late than never." She breathed a deep sigh of relief. "It's here! Mommy's present is here!" shouted Mike from the hall. "Thank goodness," said Daddy. "I couldn't have stood the suspense for another minute." Mike rushed into the kitchen carrying a package. He started to give it to Mommy, who had stretched out her hands eagerly. Then he changed his mind and held it toward Dot instead. She put the verse she had written under the wrapping. Now Mike really did give it to Mommy, wishing her a happy Mother's Day for all of them. By this time Mommy didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. She took out the poem and read it out loud. "The kids in this picture all love you a lot. We're glad you're our mother. Peg, Fluff, Mike, and Dot." With trembling fingers Mommy removed the wrapping and gazed at the present. "It's the most beautiful present in the world," she said over and over again. Grandma looked up from her empty frame and said that she was beginning to understand. They all crowded around Mommy to see the picture. Dot was almost afraid to look. Much to her surprise, her picture wasn't bad at all. Her eyes looked as if she were very happy over some secret, and there was a natural little smile on her lips. After they had talked about the picture for a while, Grandma said, "I'd give 2 cents to know what made you girls look so happy in that photograph." "I was thinking about the freshman dance at the end of June," said Peg. "I think I know who's going to invite me." "I was thinking about the emerald ring I'm going to have when I get rich, and all the other things too," said Fluff. Dot didn't say anything, but she remembered just what had made her look and feel so happy. Pierre had told her how nice she looked, how petite. Dot must find out what that word meant. Daddy turned to Mike. "What I want to know," he said, "is what was worrying you when you were having the picture taken? You're frowning and biting your lips." Mike frowned again as he thought of it. "I was wondering," he explained, "how we were ever going to get enough money by June to buy you a Father's Day present." Daddy threw back his head and laughed so loudly that no one even noticed the roar of the L train as it rushed past the window. Chapter 6. Dot Goes to the Rescue. Dot could tell that something was worrying Peg. Now when Peg came home from high school, she didn't tell her family about those hard, mysterious subjects, Latin and algebra. She didn't tell which boys had walked home with her that day, or what kind of dress her pretty English teacher wore. Now she hardly talked to anyone. Sometimes her eyes had a dreamy, far-away expression. Sometimes they looked angry. The other Flemings thought it best not to ask any questions. Then at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, something happened. Everyone was in the small living room except Grandma and Daddy. Daddy was out driving his taxi, and Grandma was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Soon she came into the living room, her cheeks as pink as the apron she was wearing. She must have just opened the oven door to see how the meat was coming along. "I forgot to get bread for supper," she said. "Peg, will you run down to Mitten's Market and get a loaf?" Peg had been standing at the window watching the L trains rush by. Now she whirled toward Grandma, her eyes flashing angrily. "No," she said, "I won't go to Mitten's. Let Mike go. He isn't doing anything." The angry answer was so unexpected that Dot gasped out loud, and Grandma opened her eyes wide. Mommy, too, looked surprised. "Peg," she said in a low voice, "don't ever use that tone to your grandma again, or to anyone else for that matter." Mommy's voice was never loud, but it could sound stern and cold. "Mike is doing his homework," she continued. "It is you who aren't doing anything." "I'm thinking," Peg replied. "Can't a person be busy thinking, or do you have to be doing something that everyone can see?" "I'm thinking too," mimicked Mike. He held his hand up to his face so that his thumb was under his chin. His merry blue eyes had a dreamy, faraway expression. He looked so much like Peg that all the Flemings burst out laughing. All but Peg. She glared at Mike as if she wanted to shake him. Grandma felt sorry that she had caused all this fuss. "I'll tell you what we'll do," she suggested. "We'll draw lots. I'll put a mark on one piece of paper. The others will be blank. Whoever gets the mark goes to Minton's, whether she's thinking or not." Grandma went into the kitchen and came back with a bowl. She took a piece of paper and tore it into 4 parts. On one she made a mark. Then she folded each paper and dropped it into the bowl. She shook the bowl hard. "Ready, set, grab!" she called, holding out the bowl. The 4 Flemings grabbed. Each unfolded a paper and glanced down at it. Peg shrugged her shoulders and went back to the window. Fluff and Mike yelled, "Not me!" Dot's face fell. "I guess I'm the one," she said, and took the money from Grandma. Minton's market was on 3rd Avenue, too, just half a block from where the Flemings lived. The evening was mild and pleasant, and Dot wondered why they had all made such a fuss about going out. She opened the door and walked into the big, clean store. It did not smell as spicy as the delicatessen store or as sugary as the bake shop, but it did have one advantage that they didn't have. It was mysterious. There were shelves all along one big wall. The shelves reached almost to the ceiling, and on them were hundreds of cans with the most wonderful names: peaches, cherries, loganberries, shredded pineapple. Dot wished she could taste a little from each can. All the clerks were busy, so Dot waited and looked around. On the upper shelves were cans of vegetables, and above them jars of pickles and relishes. To the right were cans of soup. Dot had never known there were so many kinds of food in the world as you could find in Minton's market. As Dot stood waiting, a customer said, "And a box of oatmeal, please." "That's on the top shelf," the clerk told her. He took a long pole with a hook at the end, and he held it up to the very highest shelf. The hook curved around the box, holding it securely. The clerk swung the box through the air. Dot held her breath. She was sure that it would drop and hit someone. When the clerk brought it safely down, she sighed with relief. Near her a voice said, "May I help you, miss?" Dot did not look up, for she was quite sure that no one would be calling her miss. Someone repeated the question, touching her lightly on the shoulder as he spoke. It was a broad-shouldered young man in a stiff white coat that had Minton's printed on it. The young man had dark curly hair, and he wore eyeglasses. When he said "Miss" a second time, Dot straightened up tall and knew that she liked this young man very much. She told him what she wanted and followed him to the back of the store where the bread was kept. He put a loaf into a bag and smiled a big pleasant smile as he took Dot's money. Looking at him again, Dot realized that he wasn't a young man at all, but a boy about 15. Probably he went to high school and worked after school. That was what Mike was looking forward to so eagerly. Dot always liked to think about new people she met, and she thought about the broad-shouldered clerk as she walked home. "He's not the handsome type that Peg would go for," she thought, "but I like him. He's very nice." He was the first person who had ever called Dot Miss. Dot and Peg shared a little bedroom and a big bed. The room had a dresser with 4 drawers, 2 for each of them. Over the dresser was a mirror, and on the dresser, as well as on the walls, were pictures of Peg's and Dot's favorite movie stars. Some of the pictures changed often, but others smiled down at the girls month after month. Dot was reading in bed that night when Peg came into the room. Without smiling or saying a word, Peg took off her dress, put on her kimono, and started to brush her hair in front of the mirror. Dot pretended to read, but she watched Peg. Peg's hair was shoulder length and a lovely auburn color. Under the electric light, Dot could see the gold lights in it. Peg brushed harder and harder with big, angry strokes. "I wish I had your hair," Dot told her sister with envy in her voice. "It's such a nice color, and it has such a lovely wave." Peg put down the brush and faced Dot. "What good does it do me?" she asked. "I'm not even going to the freshman dance next week." "You're not?" Dot repeated. "Didn't anyone ask you?" It was such a tactless question that Dot could have bitten her tongue for asking it. "Someone did ask. He wasn't the right someone, so I said I was going with someone else." Dot closed her book and tried to figure this out. Finally she said, "Could you start at the beginning? I don't understand all the someones." Peg looked as if she wanted to talk. "I was sure Bill Farnsworth was going to ask me," she said. "I told you about him, didn't I?" Peg had told a lot about Bill. He was the most popular boy in the freshman class and the best football player. And added to that, he was tall and good-looking. He seemed to like me very much, Peg continued. He always talked to me in the hall, and a few times he's treated me to sodas at the drugstore. You should have seen the girls look at me when we came in together. I was absolutely sure he'd ask me. He may yet, Dot suggested. No, he's asked someone else. She's hardly bigger than you, Dot. But I heard someone say that Bill always likes to dance with little girls. For the past few minutes Dot's heart had ached with sympathy for her sister. Now she felt nothing but happiness for the girl whose name she didn't even know, the little girl, hardly bigger than herself, whom Bill Farnsworth was taking to the dance. She did not hear what Peg was saying. Somehow she and the other girl seemed to be one. She was in a lovely ballroom, the kind she had seen in the movies. The lights were soft and low. An orchestra was playing, and a very handsome boy was whirling a girl through space. The girl's feet hardly touched the floor. Someone said, "That's Dot Fleming. Bill always likes to dance with little girls." Dot heard Peg's voice again, and the big ballroom changed to a small bedroom. The dance would have to wait a few years, but it was something to dream about. If Bill Farnsworth liked little girls, maybe there would be someone in her high school class who would too. Now she must forget about herself and listen to Peg. "Now I wish I could get Sam Edwards to ask me again," Peg was saying. "But he's probably invited someone else by now." "Is he nice?" Dot asked. "He's very nice, but not handsome like Bill. He's too broad for his height and he wears glasses. He looks nice when he smiles. By the way, he works at Minton's. That's why I didn't want to go down there. I'd feel funny if he waited on me after I refused to go to the dance with him." Dot recognized the description. Sam Edwards was the nice clerk who had waited on her, the one who had called her Miss. Dot didn't sleep well that night, for she was too busy planning. Maybe it wasn't too late for Peg to be invited to the dance. After school the next day, Dot went into the kitchen, closed the door behind her, and began to whisper to Grandma. Grandma told her to talk naturally, because the roar of the L trains and of Mike's shouting were enough to drown out her voice even if the door were open. As Dot talked, Grandma's brown eyes twinkled, and she shook her head so that her silvery curls danced. That evening, at about 10 minutes to 6, Grandma came into the living room. "Someone will have to go to Minton's," she said. "I forgot the milk." "Again?" exclaimed Peg sharply, but the look in Mommy's eyes prevented her from saying anything more. "I suppose I'll have to go," Dot said, getting up slowly as if she didn't want to go. "Hey, let me go," Mike interrupted. "I can't get this arithmetic anyway, so I'll go for the milk and one of you do my arithmetic." "That's not honest," Grandma announced. "You go, Dot. Better hurry. The store closes at 6." Dot walked down the 2 flights of steps and over to Minton's as slowly as she could. It was exactly 6 when she stepped into the store. There were no other customers. The clerks had taken off their stiff white coats and were putting on jackets. Dot went directly to the young man who had waited on her last night. She told him what she wanted. "Another minute and you'd have found us closed," he said good-naturedly. He gave Dot the bottle of milk and put his hand out for the money. Dot put her hand in her pocket and took it out empty. Her cheeks flushed and she looked ready to cry. "Oh, I haven't any money," she said. "I was in such a hurry to get here before the store closed that I left the money." Grandma had agreed with her that a little white lie, told to help someone else and not to hurt anyone, would be forgiven, but you couldn't do it often. The young man looked from Dot's worried face to the bottle of milk. "I'll tell you what we'll do," he said. "You look honest, so I'll ring up my own money in the cash register, and you pay me tomorrow. How's that?" Dot hesitated, thinking that she liked Sam better than ever. "I'll tell you what I'd rather do," she said. "You put your own money in the cash register, but come home with me and I'll pay you. I live on this block. You see," she went on, surprised at her own boldness, "we Flemings never borrow." Behind his big, dark-rimmed glasses, Sam's eyes brightened. "Flemings! Say, are you related to Peg Fleming?" "I'm her sister," Dot told him. "Do you know Peg?" Sam said that he went to high school with Peg, and yes, he'd go home with Dot to get the money. When they were outside, Dot walked as slowly as she could, because she wanted time to find out something. I suppose you're going to the freshman dance, she said, as if she were making conversation, not as if it really mattered. Dot was surprising herself. She was so eager to help Peg to go to the dance that she wasn't shy or nervous as she played her part. Then, before Sam could answer, Dot went on talking. She told Sam that Peg had thought everything was settled about the dance, but now the boy she had expected to go with couldn't take her after all. There, thought Dot, that's practically the truth. Sam Edwards gave a long, cheerful whistle. You mean the poor guy is sick? He said. Too bad. There's a lot of flu going around. He sounded happier and happier with every word he said. Suddenly he began to whistle. This is my lucky day. You're going, of course? Dot asked again. Maybe I am, Sam told her. You see, Peg said she couldn't go with me, and I had my heart set on her or no one, so I didn't ask anyone else. But now if the other guy is sick, maybe I have a chance. Imagine me going to the dance with Peg Fleming. Sam almost danced up the 2 flights of steps. Grandma came to the door, and when she saw Dot, she said, Oh, Dot, you didn't take the money. I left it on the washtub for you. I know, Dot told her. Grandma, this is Sam Edwards. He rang up his own money, and I told him to come home with me, and we'd pay him. When Dot said Sam Edwards, she raised her voice and hoped that no L train would pass by and drown out the name. No train did. The only thing that happened was that Peg came out of the living room into the hall. She gave Sam her brightest smile. Why, Sam, imagine Dot discovering you, she said sweetly. Sam seemed to forget all about Dot, Grandma, and his money. He just looked at Peg admiringly. You give the young man the money, Peg. It's in the kitchen, said Grandma, and she and Dot joined the others in the living room. It must have taken Peg 10 minutes to give Sam the money. During those 10 minutes, Grandma and Dot looked up at each other and several times and smiled. After a while, Sam looked into the living room. So long, everyone. Glad to know you. So long, Dot. Peg came in and helped to set the table. Her eyes were glowing and her cheeks were pink. She looked the way she used to, happy and self-confident. Once she looked up and her eyes met Dot's. Thanks, Dot, she said. What are you thanking her for? Mike asked. She didn't do anything. I'm just thanking her for forgetting the money, said Peg, and she, Dot, and Grandma burst out laughing.